Hey everybody and welcome to my channel. Today I'm making another mixed media spread in this smaller sketchbook from Canson, and I'm working with distress inks again using stencils, and I'm stamping with my stencils directly on the background to create a lot of texture today. I'm using rusty hinge to start with, and I'm spritzing that stencil with the ink with a good amount of water. And then I press it onto my paper using some kind of paper towel that soaks up the amount of ink that comes out of the stencil at the sides. And that gives you really lovely and interesting textures. Every time it's a bit different, and it's also some kind of experimenting how much water you need. But I think that's the fun part of it. You never know what you get. And I had never a background that turned out ugly with this technique, so I think you can't go wrong with it. The journal I'm working in is the Canson Graduate Drawing Sketchbook in an A6 format. It's, I think, the only one you can get this small. The other art journals, which are mixed media paper, are only available in an A5 size, but I love those too. I use those more for sketching and drawing. But this small one is really nice for some art journal pages because it's not too big and you can create something quickly. I'm spreading a little bit of the ink around with a brush and some water. And then I go in with another stencil. By the way, I've used the Marks number 3 stencil, and this is the Wheels stencil. We have a Black Friday deal going on the whole week, and it runs until tomorrow. So in case you want to get some of our stencils or stamps, you can save 15%. I will put the details in the description, and they will also be on the blog. So you can maybe save some money. I'm doing the same thing that I've just done before, just with forest moss. And that brings in more detailed texture because that stencil has not so much, I would say, surface. It has more details. And I think it's quite interesting to have this as well on the background. In my next step, I'm using a mini gel plate together with the forest moss ink. I also spritz it with a little bit of water when I have the ink on the plate, and then I just create some texture on the background. It's similar to the technique where you put the ink on your surface and then dip your paper in. That's just the other way around. You put your surface on the paper. I spritzed that background with some droplets of water, and now I'm heat setting it. I don't want to mix everything together, so you have to heat set it from time to time to build up layers and not create muddy colors. I'm doing the same with the gel plate, using that rusty hinge again to bring in more of that orangey brownish color. This color combo is one of my favorites. I really like it. I just used it recently in another small art journal page that I posted as a reel. And I think it's such a lovely color combination. And it's also perfect for autumn. I dried that background again so I can go over the top with some more layers. And in my next layer, I wanted to use some Distress Oxide ink. The Oxide ink have this white oxide effect in them, which is a pigment, and that lays over the top of other stuff. And it also always comes to the top when you mix a Distress Oxide with a Distress ink, get it wet, and then dry it, the oxide comes to the top, and that's a nice effect. And here I used I think it was the bundle sage, and I did the same. I spritzed the ink on the stencil with water, and then I'm pressing that onto my page. It's not very visible when it's wet, but it will be more visible once it's dry, and that creates a really nice texture on top of that inky background. I am also using the bundled sage with the Gelli Plate to bring in a little bit more texture, that this layers up on top brings in more depth to the page, and that's what I really love, and that's why I love playing with distress inks and oxides together. I think something on the left here, it's too busy, and I want to calm it down a bit by just covering it with some darker pattern, and I'm using the forest moss again with that cross-stitch stencil, and I put that over the top so it's a bit, yeah, it's a bit more structured at this area, and it also brings in a lot more dark color, and I think that that's just perfect at this place. I like that I have some light areas with the white in between and some darker ones, and that orange. I think it's important to leave some white spots on these kind of busy backgrounds, otherwise it will be just too flat. Whilst I'm heat setting the background, I spritz it with some water with that spray bottle just to bring in even more texture. The droplets create some really lovely effects, but I showed this so often in my recent videos. I think you know what I mean. When you use a paper towel, you can soak the water up on the page, and that will lift some of the ink and leave some lighter spots. When the page is dry, I also want to do some more stamping on the background, and here I picked that spiral stamp from the Mix It Up #4 stamp set, and I'm using the forest moss in the Oxide version because, as I said, that's opaque and will sit on top of the page a little bit more, except when I would stamp with the distress ink, so it's a bit more visible. Especially when you are stamping with lighter colors, I would use the Distress Oxides. I really like that spiral stamp. It blends a bit into the background and gives some really lovely interest. And as always, I'm stamping it at least 2 times, so I have the same element more than once on my page, and that makes everything a bit cohesive. I decided to add a third impression, just a little hint to the bottom. I'm going to add a little bit more texture with another stamp from that same set, and I'm not sure which color I'm going to use in this case. It might be black because it's just some kind of a ticket stamp which has some details with the writing, and then it's easier to see to stamp it in black because you can see that better. If you stamp it in a different color, it might be lost, I would say, and with this black it stands out a bit more. For the focal image, I'm using my Sketchy Leaves number 5 stencil, and I'm working with Distress Oxide ink in Wild Honey. I would have used the Rusty Hinge, but I don't have this in the Oxide version. So I'm using the Wild Honey, and I'm just using that blending brush and create that leaf. You can use a big gel plate and place everything on top, because that will stick, the paper and the stencil will stick to the gel plate, and then your stencil does not move around. That's a nice idea to keep everything in place. I'm going to let this dry completely. It's very important because I want to go on top with some embossing powder, and I don't want to have everything full of embossing powder. I just want to have some stamped details. I'm placing the stencil back over the image again, and I'm using an embossing ink and stamp some smaller texture stamps I have through the stencil onto the paper. I try not to overlap the things I have been stamping. It's a bit hard to see, but usually you know where you have already stamped. And once I'm done with everything, I will emboss this leaf with white powder, and that will give it a really lovely and interesting texture. And with this way, you can always create different styles of these kind of leaves. I'm now going to heat set the embossing powder and then cut the image out. Unfortunately, I forgot to press record, and what I did, I've stamped these butterfly wings to the left and to the right, and I'm now stamping these again onto a piece of paper. Well, I have stamped these again onto a piece of collage paper, and I'm cutting those out, and I'm going to adhere them exactly on top of the ones on the page. And the reason why I've stamped them to the page also is because they have a wavy wings, some wavy wings, which are really hard to cut out. And so I just cut through the black straight, and the wavy border or the wavy wings are already on my page. And so I can just glue that in, and it looks like, yeah, it looks perfect. I don't know how to describe it, but I hope you understand what I mean. I'm now using the glue stick, and I'm adhering the butterfly wings to my page. I haven't adhered the focal image, but I plan to adhere it to the right side. I think it just fits the best in this area. To adhere that botanical element, I'm using some liquid craft glue. I'm also going to build a sentiment with words from our Mix a Sentiment stamp set. It's on sale in November. It's 10% off plus the Black Friday 15%. You can save up to 25% on this stamp set. So if you want to have it, it's the best time now. I hope you enjoyed that video, and I hope you like my page, and I wish you a lovely weekend. Bye.